All right, music fans, welcome back. Harmless me here talking real music in real time for a couple of real people out there, just like you and just like me. All right, so again, in the mail, which has been really nice to me this week, the U.S. Postal Service, this arrived Voltage and their album Fortunes and Willows. And if you like Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, that would be the first band I would compare this to. It has its own vibe, as I often say, but this is just great music from start to finish, and it will make you think of the best years of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. And these guys, if you look at their music, if you go and check out YouTube, you will find that they do covers of various Tom Petty songs. And they do them very respectfully and in a way that, again, you could tell they're just very much involved with the whole Tom Petty legacy. So Voltage, another band from Holland, yeah, and they tipped me off to the other band that I featured yesterday, the Leaf DLU band, which is equally good in a different way. I mean, there's just great music if you know where to find it, and I'm sharing it right here. Some people say, "Yeah, just get to the point. What are you talking about today? You're going to talk about Daryl Hall. Talk about Daryl Hall." I'm like, "All right, I'll talk about Daryl Hall and John Oates. How's that?" So again, Daryl Hall has a brand new album out. It's called D, and John Oates has a solo album out as well right now. Uh, this is what Daryl says about the album. He says it's a complete thought. We organized the songs to go through a journey. We didn't write the songs with that in mind, but then we realized what we had, and then we just made it more or less almost a concept album. Now, I've gone and listened to the D album, and it's pretty good. Um, you know, Daryl Hall, for his age, is still a great singer. There are moments where he isn't his former self, and you can kind of sense that. But it doesn't seem like he's struggling when he's singing these songs. He's still doing some falsetto things, and he's still Daryl Hall. He's very distinctive and one of the greatest vocalists, by the way, in music history. I don't know how you argue with that. A lot of people, they talk about their great rock singers, but Daryl Hall, he's amazing, and he deserves all the accolades. I've heard some different things about Daryl Hall as a person, though. I know people who have interacted with him, and he's not always the most kind and humble and gracious person, from what I've heard. But anyway, putting that aside, that might have something to do with the whole John Oates feud, which this is what he says. This paragraph here in this article about Daryl's new album is pretty blunt. John and I did not have a creative relationship for decades. All right. And he's talking going back to the early 1980s when they had that big string of nonstop hit songs on the radio. He made some comments about Kiss on My List, and that was basically him doing everything. And it could be true. Look, Hall is the guy in the duo, right? Who is the R&B guy. And Oates comes off as more of a roots Americana guy. And if you listen to Hall and Oates, it's mostly an R&B band with a little bit of an AOR feel to it at times. And on occasion, if you go back far enough, you can hear a little bit of Americana influence from Oates, but it's mostly a Daryl Hall band. And so I've thought this in the past, like this just seems all for Daryl. The music is Daryl's. Um, the songs are designed for Daryl's voice. When Oates got to sing, it was kind of like a novelty. Like you'd hear him on You've Lost That Love and Feeling or She's Gone, one of the earliest Hall and Oates hit songs, right? He's on there. Which you thought, okay, they'll probably keep doing that, but Oates just diminished as the years went on. I remember Oates sang like the third or fourth single from Big Bam Boom, and it was called Possession Obsession. I remember hearing that going, whoa, this album is doing so well that they're giving John Oates a chance on his own to hit the top 40. And the song probably cracked the top 30 and then it faded away and no one's played it ever since. But it's a pretty good song. Anyway, this is what Daryl Hall says. We toured and toured, and it was very restrictive to me and to John. So he's speaking to what John believes as well, which I would rather hear from John on this because he has a completely different perspective. He did an interview, I believe, with CBS This Morning, which is probably worth watching or listening to. Um, uh, Daryl goes on to say the real truth of it all is John just said one day he didn't want to do it anymore. Well, from John's perspective, right? It's all about Daryl. It's been about Daryl, and nobody's going to argue that Daryl isn't this super creative force out there, and his voice is on everything. And you just feel as though this is a Daryl Hall band with Oates as like this sidekick. Um, he said again, okay, meaning that, he didn't want to do it anymore. But Oates didn't make the parting an easy breakup. Now, this is interesting because this reminds me of the whole Journey thing where, yeah, you want me gone? All right, it's going to cost you. Talking about Steve Perry. So Oates is kind of doing the same thing here. It's a brand, and he knows that Hall and Oates is one of the most recognizable things on planet Earth. When you say Hall and Oates, people go, either you're driving a truck filled with oats, right? Or you're talking about this music franchise, which is just, very iconic and everybody knows what it is. It's kind of like Doritos, right? People know what Doritos are. People know what Hall and Oates is, all right, or was. And so he's probably going to make this breakup a little more difficult. And where he's going to do this is probably on the financial side of things. And I don't blame Oates. He was in the right place at the right time, did enough to get his name on the marquee. He's a fairly talented musician on top of it. He just is very different. This kind of reminds me of Michael Nesmith when he was in the Monkees. He was this super talented guy, but he didn't fit with what they were doing. And they tried to incorporate some of what he did into it. And today it sounds okay, but back in those days, the producers were like, we need Neil Diamond in here again to write another song. Where's Boyce and Hart? And where's Carole King? So and we need to have, Davy or Mickey singing. We don't want this guy singing because he sounds like a country bumpkin. And John sounds very different on his own. If you go listen to his newest album, it's nowhere near anything that Hall and Oates did together, as far as I can remember. Again, there may have been some things from the 70s that got on some of those albums, but for the most part, we've learned that this was Daryl Hall's baby. Anyway, he goes on to say here, I always say I've been a solo artist my whole life. Again, this is Daryl Hall. It's like Steve Perry saying that he's a loner and never felt like he was part of Journey, if you remember that. So this is a similar admission from Daryl Hall. He says, I was just working with John, mostly. I can't speak for John because I haven't spoken to him in a long, long time. Well, that's not good, but I think that's how he feels too. And he says, and good on both of us. Well, it's super good if you're Daryl Hall because you've written a lot of songs and you've made a lot of money. Not as good for John Oates. And that's why John Oates is probably trying to make sure that his portion of the pie is large enough. So again, he can depart and at least say, hey, I'm going to be on this marquee for the rest of eternity. I want to get my fair share. So again, even if this duo permanently breaks up, which it appears they have broken up permanently, John Oates gets what he deserves. And I think Oates should get what he deserves based on the premise. The original premise was this was a duo. It evolved into a guy who kind of took control of it. And Oates is basically saying, you know what? That's nice and all, but I deserve what I deserve. So, anyway, the story, the sad story of Daryl Hall and John Oates continues. Two guys who I think are both very creative, but maybe they would have been more creative on their own rather than being a duo. And the duo ended up being more or less just Daryl Hall dictating to Oates what the band was going to do. So that's the way I see it. I could be wrong, though. I've been wrong before. People say I'm wrong all the time. Here's Voltage. I don't know if I'm wrong about this band. Fortunes and Willows. It's really good. You should go listen to this. Voltage has several albums to choose from. They're a band you've probably never heard of from Holland. And all I can tell you is I'm discovering a lot of music that's not being made in the United States, which harkens back to the best music that was made in the United States 30, 40, 50 years ago. I featured, just as a little side note, because it's sitting right here, I featured this album yesterday, the Leaf DeLiu Band, and this is called Mighty Fine. And if you're an Allman Brothers fan, just so you got Allman Brothers there, and you got some Tom Petty influence here. I mean, you can't really beat that stuff. And like I always say, nothing is coming here to replace what we've lost. All of those great bands. I mean, you do have Offspring out there that are doing things like, you know, the Allman Brother kids. Dickie Betts has a kid, and they're, you know, it's okay. It's not as good as these two are. So again, just my thoughts on this stuff. Daryl Hall, kind of sad that he's on his own, and so is John Oates. Check out Daryl's new album D. And by the way, if you want to hear the new Daryl Hall or the new John Oates, tune in to Modern Retro Radio, where this is right up their alley. Anything that comes out by a classic artist that mainstream radio, they won't even go near either one of those two projects. They might play the Daryl Hall on a couple of stations for a week or two, but you can count on Modern Retro Radio for playing all this stuff. So again, thanks to them for helping me. I try to do a little bit to help them. Hopefully I'm not sending people away from them. Check out their website, modernretroradio.com. I'll try to remember to put a link in the description. So all you got to do is click on the link and you can go listen to some great music all weekend long. Again, my name is Dave. If you can support this channel, that would be fantastic. YouTube memberships, buy me a coffee, which has been pretty cool. And also Patreon, where, yes, I am talking to folks almost all day long, 24/7. It's an interesting thing, but I appreciate the patrons because they stick with it. They do a monthly contribution, maybe $1, maybe $5, whatever they can afford in this absolutely horrible economy that we're still living through. Let's hope things get better. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Politics aside, let's just hope things get better in this country where people can afford to buy a house and people can buy gas for their car and groceries aren't insane. And also these endless wars someday would just end. That would be nice. But you need to pray for peace in the Middle East and probably around the world. And like I always say, in your own heart, Jesus is the way. He's the only way. I put that in here because Of all the things I talk about, there's nothing more important than talking about a relationship with Jesus. So if you don't have one, try to get one. All right. And I'm sure you know people who can talk to you about it. If you're a patron, you want to have a conversation about that, that would be awesome. So I'll see you over on Patreon.